Well, good morning. It's good to be back here. And I was here a couple times when Reverend Phil was speaking, guest speaking. I came in, and my wife, Reverend Margie Brach, spoke here once to fill in, and she sends her hi and hello. She's currently in Napa, over at the Unity Spiritual Center in Napa Valley. Margie and I are the regular speakers the first and second Sunday on Napa. You know, they don't have a minister either, so we fill in there. And like Claudia mentioned, that we're floaters, we're roamers. We have an alternative ministry called Unity in Action. We're under the Unity Worldwide Ministry, just like your center here. And our mission is to fill in, be guest speakers for the communities in Northern California. I've spoken up in Eureka. We've been down in San Francisco, San Jose, and different churches around here. And we can fill in at a drop of a hat. 10:30 one Saturday night, I get this call. Bob, I'm sick. Could you or Margie come? Sure. Who is this? Where are you? And we grab a talk and we can come in there. So that's the value of being a fill-in speaker. So anyone, when the conference comes up, you know, we're here to fill in for the conference speakers so they can go and go back with their Unity buddies. Well, the title of this talk that I gave is called Keep a True Lent. The email that I got asked if I would speak about the book, Keep a True Lent, and about Mr. Fillmore, and about this radio show that I've got. But also, since this is the beginning of Lent, it's entirely appropriate to speak about Lent. I mean, this is a wonderful period of spiritual unfoldment. And we have some wonderful tools to help us along the line. So, keep a true Lent. This feasting and fasting, like Claudia said, is drawn from the book, Keep a True Lent. And every year, Unity World Headquarters puts these out, and they're a wonderful little tool to keep on your breakfast table and start the day with. This is called Fasting and Feasting, because you fast during the week. On Sunday, it's a feast day, so you feast on Sundays. So this is an alternate fasting and feasting little readings. And it did come from this book called Keep a True Lent, by Charles Fillmore, under his name. But this was published in 1953. So Charles passed in 1948. He didn't come back from the grave. Charles believed that he was going to live in his body forever. He was going to have this regenerated body like Jesus had, and he was going to live there. And I remember Dorothy Pearson telling me he called Dorothy to their home on Pryor Road, and he's laying in the sickbed and said, Dot, I don't think I'm doing it. He says, Mr. Fillmore, you have done an awful lot. Cora Diedrich Fillmore, Charles's second spouse. Most Unity historians believe that Cora put this together. And it's actually two books in one. The last half of the book is what they call Lenten lessons. And it's got a lesson for each day in Lent, very much like the book that we have here. And each day's reading has a title, like Ash Wednesday is called Denial. And it has a reading from the Bible, primarily the Gospels. And for Ash Wednesday, it's Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 16. And then it's got a Lenten lesson. Also, in the front part of the book, there's a series of lessons that kind of tie in with the Lenten lessons. And if you're interested in this book, you can probably download it as a PDF. TruthUnity.net, Mark Hicks is a licensed Unity teacher, puts this wonderful website with all these books. I see Kristen shaking her head as being in school, a lot of stuff you can download. And you can probably buy it secondhand. You know, I'm a book guy. When I teach these classes, and a lot of my students love to get the electronic version. Now, I know I see some head shaking. Like, when I'm putting a class together, for me to use an electronic version, it's hard. You know, I can pick up a book. I can say, all right, I read about this somewhere about here in the lower right-hand corner. There it is. You know, for me in electronics, I can't do that. So you can probably buy this on a second-hand bookstore and get it quickly. So you can start. And even if it gets here after Lent, it's a wonderful tool for you to start with. You've got this book here that you can read. Ash Wednesday and Lent. Why do we call it Lent? I love to check history stuff and how it comes up. That's part of my forte, I think. Well, Lent comes from an Anglo-Saxon word meaning to lengthen. Because what happens in the springtime? The days get longer. And it came off in the early church about a day of repentance and penance and fasting and abstinence to prepare for the feast of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the rising from the dead. Now, Charles believed that Lent is a season of spiritual growth, a time for progressive unfoldment. It's a time of fasting, abstain from. Well, what are we abstaining from? Charles Fillmore believed we abstain from error thinking and focus on the truth, capital T. So it's a time of getting rid of the old thoughts. You may have to kind of look back at what were your early experiences of Lent. I grew up in a Roman Catholic tradition, went to a Catholic grammar school on the west side of Chicago. And I remember the nuns talking about, Master Brach, what are you giving up for Lent? I'm giving up chocolate, sister, and Flash Gordon on Saturday, giving up the things that I like to do, And Fillmore's entirely different view of it. He wants us to use it as a spirit of unfoldment, of spiritual growth. And one way to kind of internalize this for us, Lent, L-E-N-T. Let's eliminate negative thinking. Lent. Eliminate negative thinking as we move through this 46-day period. Charles Fillmore was really into this Keep a True Lent, and this was before the book. Anytime Charles spoke or gave a lesson, there was somebody there taking it down in note hand and typing these things up. And they would use them later on for lessons in the publications. They had like 3 or 4 magazines going at one time. So somebody would type these up and they would massage them and put them in publication. Well, Charles, he didn't spend all his time back in the village. In fact, he married Cora in 1933. Myrtle Fillmore passed in 1931, and Charles ends up marrying their secretary, Cora Diedrich Fillmore, Cora Diedrich. And there was a little flap, I think, at the village. Dad's marrying. Ernest Wilson did the marriage ceremony at Lowell Fillmore's house. And I think it was the last time that Ernest Wilson ever asked, is there any reason these two should... But anyway, Cora Diedrich Fillmore now, according to Dorothy, helped preserve Charles' life because she got him out into the public, out into the world. And they married in 33, he passed in 48, and Dorothy firmly believed that Cora was a firm vegetarian, and she really held him to the line on that, but she got him out into the world. I know in 1932, he was right here in Sacramento at the Eastern Star Temple. He gave a series of lectures on the fourth dimension, which Charles Fillmore believed is that spiritual dimension, the same thing that Jesus the Christ was talking about in the kingdom of the heavens. Heavens, plural. Heavens is a state of consciousness. It's not a place we're going to go to when we die. It's right here and right now. And we can be in heaven or we can be in hell in a blink of a thought. States of consciousness. He also, in 37, he gave 60 talks down at L.A., Oakland, San Francisco, and Alameda about keeping a true Lent. Not this book, but that was the theme of it. And he spoke on Eastern Sunday to 1,300 people in Portland, Oregon. So Charles was out and about the world. Well, reflecting on our Lenten experience, the tradition that we're products of whoever got a hold of us first, folks. Maybe you were in a Catholic tradition or whatever, or maybe you were in no tradition and never even heard of Lent. And you may say, wow. And if you're in the old tradition, you think, maybe we have to kind of shift and change and see what we're going to be doing about it. Eleanor Roosevelt is quoted as saying, understanding is a two-way street. That's in person-to-person relationships or in divine-to-human relationships. You have to look at it as a two-way street, being able to see from the other side. There was this old farmer. He was sitting across the table from his wife, Mabel, holding her hands, looking into her eyes. He said, "Mabel, you've been at my side through a lot. Remember that winter that the snow was so deep and we lost a whole herd because we couldn't get out there and feed the cows? You were by my side. Or the time that the river rose up and flooded our fields, and not only our fields, but our seed corn for the next year. You were by my side. Or that time I got so deathly sick, the doctor put me in the hospital and I had an operation. And I came back out and it got worse and I had to go back and I had to have another operation. Hey, but you were by my side. And when the bank finally foreclosed and we lost the farm, Mabel, you were by my side. Says, Mabel, I've been really thinking a lot. Mabel, you're bad luck. Now, obviously, he's thinking from one direction. He thinks everything is all about him. Poor Mabel's out there by his side suffering through all this stuff, and he's not doing it. So, maybe we have to have a new way of looking at our relationships, not only internally with people when things go wrong, but also in the spirit with the divine. So, how do we view our relationship with spirit? When we respond to others, we'll respond from the highest place if we see the Christ in them. That's what one of our songs that we sang this morning. I behold the Christ in you. I know sometimes when I'm driving on the freeway here in Sacramento, I get a little irritated. And one way I find out is, I behold the Christ in him or her who's just cut in front of me for 4 lanes of traffic, saying, I behold the Christ. What if somebody walked in through that door and picked out one of you folks and said, I'm going to put $5,000, $2,500, $600 right here in your lap. $5,000, $2,500, $600 in your lap. But you have to spend it all in 1 year. And at the end of the year, I'll come back and give you another $525,600 right for you. Well, guess what? Spirit gives us 525,600 minutes in each year. So how are we spending that year time? As we move through this Lenten period, it's 46 days. So I did my little math. I was a phys ed major in college, man. I had to get out my calculator to do this. But there's 66,240 minutes in our 46 days. About 12% of our year. So how are we spending that time? Are we going to use these wonderful tools that we have? We got to keep them out. All those other extra books. And in fact, that book that you're studying by Georgiana Tree West, in this book, there's a foreword by Georgiana Tree West. Wow. We have all these wonderful tools, and how are we going to spend the time? And I know somebody's probably sitting there going, hey, Reverend Bob, what about when I sleep? Well, guess what happens when we sleep? Our subconscious does not sleep. Freud, I believe, said, dreams are the window to the subconscious. So take a look at the dreams. At one time at Unity, they had a dream department. You could write in your dream, and they would write back and tell you what it was all about. Charles Fillmore believed that he could go right to headquarters. It had all this babble and stuff. That's why he sat in the silence every night at a specific time. And he began to notice that he's seen things in his dreams. During the day, he would get hunches on business things or whatever. So when we open ourselves up to Spirit can come in. And I think it's important you have all these wonderful spiritual tools to read. Read it before you go to bed. Kind of sets the stage. I remember one time I decided I was going to read this book, SEAL Team 6. It's about the Navy counter-terrorist SEAL team that would go in. I was having these hellacious dreams. And Margie says, honey, what are you reading? I said, well, SEAL Team 6. He says, that's why. So from now on, from then on, I start reading spiritual material. I have read some of our Unity books. I see some heads on the electronic. For at night, I have a little iPod, or that's not an iPad, it's a tablet. It's not an Apple thing, it's a tablet. And I've downloaded some of the books from the early writers, Thomas Troward, Judge Thomas Troward, Warren C. Evans. As I'm reading through these things, I'm going, something that Mr. Fillmore said. Because these were the books that Fillmore had read and used in his going forth. So, this past week, Margie and I were sitting on the couch, and I was reflecting back on my time in ministerial school. And, some of the people, and Kristen, I'm sure you connected with these people, man, you become bonded right together in ministerial school. Almost like military boot camp. In fact, spiritual boot camp. There's something that happens when you go through an ordination process. And, over time, these people have passed and gone away. And I had to reflect, wow, I remember where I was when I was with those people and the good times I had. And I said, well, what about the plans that I had at that time? Have I moved forward on some of these plans? And kind of reflecting on those memories. And I was thinking, plans. Reverend Chris Chenoweth, who was a former minister down at Unity Village Chapel many years ago and runs a alternative ministry called Positive Christianity down in Woodland, Texas, had a story about this guy that had a plan. His name was Seymour. And Reverend Chris says this is a true story. Seymour was a weekend warrior. He was a real man. He loved building things with his hand. And he wanted a gas grill. So he went down to the big box store on the corner, and he got himself a gas grill, the kind you had to put together. Some assembly required. Those are buzzwords I stay away from. 45 minutes you can put it together. He had borrowed his friend's pickup truck. He got it in there, drove it home, and then he lugged it into his living room because he knew he wanted it nice and warm when he's working on it. On the way home, he took out the propane tank, had it filled, stopped at the store, got some steaks. That night, he was going to have steaks on his gas grill. Well, he opened up his boxes. There were 13 bags of parts. He spread them out on his living room floor. And he did the one smart thing. He took his golden retriever dog and put the dog in the backyard. So he had all these parts spread out. It's now mid-afternoon. He's thinking, maybe I'll kind of sit back and rest for a bit. I got time. 45 minutes. I could do this in 42 minutes. Jeez. Have those steaks. Well, he sat there for a good part of the afternoon. He figured, well, maybe I could get started on it. And as he stood up and went towards all these parts spread out in the living room, he heard the door in the back open. His daughter, Dad, I'm home. No. The golden retriever dog is now happy to see his master. Shoots into the living room, knocks all these parts all asunder. Some of them slid underneath the buck stove they had in the fireplace. And he goes, he has no idea. He didn't look at the manufacturer's suggestions, but he kind of dug them out and looked at the parts. 3 pages of parts. So he had no idea what parts were missing. So he got out his trusty power tools and did his best. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning before he finally got his drill, his gas grill together. And he eventually had steaks, but not that day. So maybe that's a little bit like our life. We start off, we have a plan for our life. Maybe stuff is handed us to in little bags with numbered parts on it. And we kind of spread them out and look at it and say, all right. And then we kind of sit back in our life and our world and say, all right. And maybe something comes along and kind of knocks these plans asunder. And maybe it's in our teens, our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, 60s, so on. But finally we have to turn to and we get down. And we have to make some concessions. We have to drill holes like he did in this grill where screws had a fit that didn't seem to fit there. So I think it's important to take a look at our plan from life. Where were we headed? Did we lose it along some way? And don't be too hard on ourselves. Jack Canfield, in one of his books, had a quote from a fellow named Dr. Daniel Amen. The 18, the 40, the 60 rule. 18-40-60 rule. When we're 18, all worried about whatever people think about us. Oh my God, I got a zit here or something like that. Or what I can wear. Time we're 40, I don't care what anybody thinks, man. By the time we're 60, we realize that nobody cared about us in the beginning. They're all focused on themselves. So, a gentleman came up to Ty Cobb, baseball player. Ty had a lifetime batting average of 367. And, baseball, anytime you hit over 300, one-third of the time at bat, that's considered good. And the reporter says, hey, Mr. Cobb, if you were playing today, what do you think you'd hit? And Ty thought for a moment, and he said, well, probably 290, maybe 300. And the reporter says, well, is that because of travel and the night claims, the artificial turf, and the new slider thing? And Ty Cobb says, no, because I'm 70. We need to recognize where we are in our life and move forward from them. One of the things when I came to the Unity Village was Judas Iscariot is a big player in the resurrection story. And I had to relook at my thing about Judas. Charles Fillmore, in one of our 12 powers, Judas represents the power of life in our sexual area, the power of life. I think, how can Mr. Fillmore make a traitor represent one of our powers? So I had to take a hard look at that and say, wait a minute. Jesus chose all his 12 people. He chose Jesus Iscariot. And they made him treasurer. Who do you make treasurer of your organizations? People you trust. He kept that money bag. So I had to relook on how this Judas was being viewed. My Catholic view is, oh man. No, Charles Fillmore says, no. He represents the power of life. The power of life to be used for good. And so, maybe you take a look at our power of life and how we're using it. And sometimes our ego can bump way up there. Nope. I'm a self-made man. I was a commissioned officer. I can read this stuff. I know how to work that. I was also a private investigator, criminal defense investigator. Did all some wonderful stuff. Ego can come up. Like this psychologist. He was on an airplane, flying across country. Sits down next to this elderly gal. And they chit-chat and they want to spend their time. And the gal says, I just left my grandchildren. I have 6 children, 10 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. And what do you do? And the guy was a little hesitant to tell what he did. And he said, I'm a child psychologist. I'm flying across country to a convention, and I'm going to give a talk on child psychology. He kind of winced, thinking, I'm going to spend the rest of the flight being badgered by this gal, asking all these little questions. So the woman turns and looks at him and says, oh, really? Well, if you want to know anything, just ask me. Recognize that around us there's these wonderful sources. So, anyway, we did our affirmation at the start of the service here, that there's one presence, one power, God the good, active in our lives. That's our first unity principle. And some of the things that can tie into that is, Reverend Dr. Tom Shepard, he used to call it, and when I was in school, we used to call it OP2, one presence, one power. So if that's really true, I look at the morning paper came late today. Sacramento Bee didn't come until 10. So anyway, but you look on the paper and you say, well, is there really one presence, one power? Look at all the stuff that's happening. But remember, that's why it's news. It's not the norm. So we get to look at spirit being active in our lives. So one of the practical teachings we can remember of this, that God is the provider. God is the source, no matter what. And God's a daily provider. He just doesn't show up and then go away. I remember when I was talking to this friend of mine about turning my will and life over to the care of God. I said, well, what's going to happen? He says, Bob, we're both Coast Guard officers. If we pull somebody out of the ocean, do we toss them back in? No. Well, do you think Spirit's going to do that if you back them into life or direction? No. We are immersed in God's help. There's not one spot where God is not. That's the saying of Eric Butterworth. He used to say that. There's not one spot where God is not. And how does God work through us? God gives us divine ideas. Spirit doesn't just show up in your life as another thing. God comes and God works through people, and he works through Spirit ideas. So I'd like to close with a quote from a gentleman named John Kabat-Zinn. I'd taken a class on stress management. It was how to deal with chronic pain and be a care provider for people dealing with chronic pain. And John Kabat-Zinn had wrote this: "What is my job on the planet is one question we might well ask ourselves over and over again. Otherwise, we may wind up doing somebody else's job and not even knowing it. And what's more, that somebody else might be a figment of our own imagination and maybe a prisoner of it as well." So maybe our Lenten task is to kind of look at what's our plan, what's our purpose, what's our job. And an old cartoon that I used to look at was this guy standing on the beach holding this porpoise, and his buddy's next to him saying, "No, I said purpose, not porpoise." So let's be clear on where we're going. Ernest Hemingway was asked to tell a story in 6 words. Okay. And his story was, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." For sale, baby shoes, never worn. So what if you had to describe your life in 6 words? Wow. So maybe in your quiet time, in your Lenten meditation, say, "All right, Spirit, what's the 6 words that describe my life? I'm going to take that as my own little thing. Work with that." So namaste, dear ones. It's great being back here with you, and we'll continue on.